May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. As teenagers, my brother Tom and I loved to ski. With our dad being a pastor, we didn't get to go skiing very often. But once a year, Dad used to take us out of school for a day so we could make the 2-hour trip to Mount Sunapee and ski on a Friday and a Saturday. Mount Sunapee was a ski area contained within a state park. Like all of the New Hampshire parks, all of the buildings and equipment were painted with just 2 colors, forest green and state park brown. The chairlifts were slow and were constantly stopping due to mechanical problems. But we didn't care. The lift tickets were only $6, and the trails were almost completely empty on Fridays. Many times, Tom and I took the old double chairlift to the North Peak, which held within its ravines and slopes the steepest terrain on the mountain. On several occasions, we skied away from the top of the chairlift to the only real expert trail in the place, the Flying Goose. We would stand next to each other, alone in the silent woods, leaning on our poles and peering down the trail as it entered the thick New Hampshire forest. One powerful step would lead us over the brink. The narrow trail dropped steeply into a ravine and then rounded a corner. The Flying Goose was a steep, twisting trail, punctuated by a series of what I would later call mandatories. Points in the trail where one is required to make a specific turn to the left or to the right. A skier who missed one of these mandatory turns would end up either crashing into the trees that lined the side of the trail or sliding down on their backside for the next 50 or 100 feet. The Flying Goose was steep and narrow and beautiful. Tom and I never took that one powerful step. We never skied the Flying Goose. As we grew older, we moved away, perfecting our ski technique on other mountains. Then a few years after Nancy and I were married, we moved back to New Hampshire, into a little town just 10 miles from Mount Sunapee. Shortly after we moved back, I discovered what the trail was really like when I hiked up the trail from the old base lodge at the state park one warm summer day. The Flying Goose was steep and narrow, top to bottom, and I could see with my skier's eyes it was a gorgeous trail, perfectly following every contour of the mountain. Later that year, the state leased Mount Sunapee to a big ski company. The company brought in bulldozers and whole tree chippers. They mowed down hundreds of trees, creating highways of uniform slopes across the mountain. The Flying Goose Trail is gone forever. I hiked it, but I'll never ski it. That was a choice, a step I'll never get to take. I will always have just a little piece of regret in myself that we never took the plunge, that we never tipped our skis over the edge of that narrow trail. One simple decision can make a big difference in life. One step to the left or right can send you the way you really need to go. One powerful step forward can get you moving in the direction that you sense is God's direction for your life. At times, we hesitate. We stand quietly and consider the turns in the road of life. Like Tom and I standing at the top of the Flying Goose, sometimes that's for a very good reason. Sometimes it's just not the right time for the big, powerful step. But if we wait too long, if we always pull ourselves back from the brink, we may find we have lost the opportunity for that one powerful step. It has always been that way. When Jesus met with his disciples for their Last Supper, he asked them to take one powerful step. Jesus said, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." For me, this is one of those bedrock passages in the Bible. For me, this is the clearest, most powerful verse of all. This is the place where we see most clearly the powerful step we are called to make as followers of Christ. Love one another. Love is the foundation, but as a church, we have always needed more than this one lesson. As a church, there are other steps we must take in order to move forward. We read about one of these in our lesson from Acts. After Christ's ascension, the apostles, Peter and Paul and others, were trying to find their way forward. They were all Jewish followers of Christ. Since Jesus was Jewish and most of his closest disciples had been Jewish, for many years the apostles understood that following Jesus would be inextricably linked with the practices of Judaism. These were practices that were powerful because they held groups of families and friends closely together for centuries. In our story from the Acts of the Apostles, Peter explains to the Jewish followers of Christ that it is time for them to take one powerful step. It is a difficult step. If you read chapter 10 as well as chapter 11, you know that Peter is asking his congregation to take a difficult step because he retells the story 3 times. The version we hear in chapter 11 is the third version. "I saw a vision. There was something like a large sheep coming down from heaven. As I looked at it closely, I saw 4-footed animals, beasts of prey, reptiles, and birds of the air. I also heard a voice saying to me, 'Get up, Peter, kill and eat.' But I replied, 'No way, I can't do that, Lord, for nothing unclean has ever entered my mouth.' But a second time the voice answered from heaven, 'What God has made clean, you must not call profane.' This happened 3 times. At that very moment, 3 men sent to me from a Gentile, from a Roman centurion named Cornelius, arrived at the house where we were. The Spirit told me to go with them and not to make a distinction between them and us." Don't make a distinction between them and us. This is the one powerful step Peter is explaining to his Jewish congregation. Stop making distinctions between Jewish followers of Christ and Gentile followers of Christ. It is ironic that it is Peter who tells them to take this powerful step, because as Peter himself describes in these chapters, it was Peter who had argued strenuously that the Jewish followers of Christ should remain separate from the Gentiles. We might say to ourselves, this seems like a trivial legalistic idea, the kind that we set aside hundreds or thousands of years ago. Then we might consider that we continue to separate ourselves as followers of Christ into Episcopalians or Lutherans or Baptists, into Roman Catholics or Anglo-Catholics, into liberals or evangelicals or Orthodox. Then we might listen again to Peter's explanation about why we need to not make distinctions between them and us. This would be one powerful step for all of the different varieties of followers of Christ to take today. This powerful step will bring us closer to the vision described in the Revelation of John. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, and I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them as their God. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more. For the first things have passed away." And the one who was seated on the throne said, "See, I am making all things new." Then he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water as a gift from the spring of the water of life." Like my brother and I, looking over the edge into that narrow, winding ski trail, most of us pull ourselves back from the brink as we read these words from Revelation. We are unsure of their meaning. We are attracted to John's vision of God's new creation. It is a vision of an end to pain, crying, and death. A vision of the water of life being given to all who thirst. A vision of God dwelling with us. But we are skeptical, sometimes even fearful of the change promised in this vision. Perhaps if we can accept these words as trustworthy and true, we might be willing and able to take one or two powerful steps toward the revelation of God's kingdom. What would it look like for St. Paul's Church to take a step toward the vision of the Revelation of John this year? I don't have a complete answer to that question, but from what we've just read, we know that it would involve something new happening. Something like singing a new song. From what we've just read about the crying and the tears, we have a pretty good idea that taking a step toward God's new creation would have something to do with caring for people in our times of vulnerability. Taking a powerful step toward God's new creation will almost certainly involve some amount of uncertainty. But as we continue our journey together, I ask that we keep this question foremost in our minds. What is the one powerful step we could take this year to move closer to God's kingdom? This year, next year, and the year after, we need to search out the places of decision. We need to take our vision from God's vision. The way forward will not be completely clear, but we will never take that one powerful step forward if we never even consider God's vision for us. We may stand together on the brink for a time, considering the best way forward. But this decision is so much more important than standing at the top of a ski trail. We must, at the very least, get ourselves to that place where we will look ahead as a church and consider which steps to take, where we consider that one powerful step could take us toward God's new creation.